Dear friends, the path is a path towards detachment. It's not a path that shows you how you can achieve things in the world. So therefore that may be not of interest for many people, but nevertheless I pass on the knowledge of the Book of Light. You use it as you wish. Everybody, even stones, even minerals, even plants, animals, humans, angels, so forth, perceive things, perceive something. And according to attachment or detachment, so to speak, they have a sensation. And we will talk today about perception and sensation. When you don't want to see anymore, if you don't have the wish to see anymore, you are not in the less concerned if everything in your body perishes. That makes possible the activity of seeing. In meditation, you detach even from the desire from seeing because you close your eyes. There you are meditating. You don't see, you don't hear, you don't feel. You don't feel, yes. Nothing. And yet you are. And it's not such a bad state of being, believe me. So, when we have the desire, at least once a day to detach from everything, soul breath meditation is very good. And then you become weary of all the activities of the senses in that moment. And maybe you were a person overwhelmed by your own senses, rather by your own sense activities. And there may have been moments in your life where you said, I wish I wouldn't have felt that, I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have seen that, and so forth and so on. Now you are in the shackles of such activities that have gained power over you. Suddenly they are like a burden to you. Now that you are right for this teaching, for the path of detachment, without destroying yourself. You destroy only, or overcome, your desire for that which now turns into suffering for you, which before gave you maybe a lot of pleasure. A consciousness grows in you that is such a superior power, greater than the power of attachment, greater than the power of the time when you were afflicted, enslaved by the six senses. Now you are ready for the consequence, to detach yourself from it. Suddenly, I give you an example. A dear person just called me, and I, of course, felt the attachment to that person. But I also know that one day I will not be anymore with that person. Either I will be dead or she will be dead. Right? Now that attachment that I have for that person clearly will cause my reincarnation and my meeting again with this person. By the way, in the same way it happens when you hate somebody. Not only when you love somebody. So the choice is yours. I only pass on that knowledge. You decide. You want to return or not. Both ways are taught here and possible. But let us look at those emotions that we have. Those sensations from a little bit distant point of view. Let's assume you want to detach from everything. I just assume. If you discover suddenly everything that arises and passes away is cause of suffering, because it's transient, transitory. And if you decide, I do not want to suffer any longer, what do you do then? Kill yourself? No way, it's not possible, because you return that fast, you can't imagine. Now for those who want to detach, I will now reveal a possibility how to do that. If you now, you can train yourself to experience everything like a delivered one, or like one who wants to be delivered. From what? From reincarnation. And from the cause of reincarnation, which is attachment to something that you like or hate. Then you would have to do the following thing. If you now feel a pleasant sensation, you would have to recognize it's transitory, it's inappropriate, it's unpleasant. But if you feel a painful sensation, you should recognize the same. It's transitory, inappropriate, unpleasant. And if there is a sensation neither pleasant nor unpleasant, recognize it is transitory, unappropriated, unpleasant. You can only do that if you have certain experience and practice with soul breath meditation, because then you can look at everything with distance, with meditative distance. Yeah, say that. Now then, if now a pleasant sensation is felt, you feel it as a delivered one. If now an unpleasant sensation is felt, you feel it as a delivered one. If you now feel a sensation neither pleasant nor unpleasant is felt, like as a delivered one. You thus confront your own sensations as a delivered one. And they cannot take captive anymore. They cannot take you captive anymore. Let's look at an experience. Through the eye and forms, there is an arising of sight consciousness. Conjunction of the three gives contact. Through that, the sensation of pleasantness or unpleasantness arises, or of neither pleasantness nor unpleasantness. Now, you see a beautiful woman, beautiful. You see dog shit. Yeah, dog shit. You see, according to the highest teaching of the Book of Light, these are states of ignorance. Ignorance. When you judge like that, you are ignorant. But when you see everything as a delivered one, and you are struck by a pleasant sensation, you will not experience any longer joy. No satisfaction, no attachment, no motion of desire. If you're now on your path of deliverance, detachment, you are struck by an unpleasant sensation. You don't grieve, you don't mourn, you don't lament, you don't beat your breast, distraught. You feel no motion of aversion. If now you are struck by a sensation neither pleasant nor unpleasant nor understands, sometimes my thoughts are ahead of what I want to say. If if you are struck by a sensation, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, you understand the arising and passing away of the sensation. How can you possibly be that sensation? You may cling to it, yes, no problem. But you better look at it if you are on the way of deliverance without comfort, without misery, without any judgment, no matter how your feelings are at that moment. Then, when you act like this, sooner or later, all these irritating feelings may vanish. Then you are called the liberated one. Oh, it may take a whole lifetime. It may take an hour, 2, a year, who knows? It depends on your state of attachment, of course. On what else? Thus, a saint dominates his senses, or somebody who wants to become a saint. He sees a form with the eye, he hears a sound with the ear, he smells an odor with the nose, he tastes a flavor with the tongue. He touches something. Ooh, the touch. Yeah. With the body. He thought an idea. With the organ of thought. And because he does so, he may be moved pleasantly, unpleasantly, partly unpleasantly, who knows? But if he wishes, on his path of detachment and liberation and deliverance, the repugnant I will perceive unrepugnant, then he perceives unrepugnant. When he wishes the unrepugnant, I will perceive repugnant, he perceives repugnant. And when he thinks or wishes the partly repugnant and partly unrepugnant, I will perceive unrepugnant, then he perceives unrepugnant. If he wishes the partly unrepugnant and partly repugnant, I will perceive repugnant, then he perceives repugnant. And if he wishes the repugnant and the unrepugnant, both I will banish from me, and I will remain with equal mind, thoughtful and clearly conscious. Then he remains with equal mind, thoughtful and clearly conscious. This is how you dominate your senses. And it may not work in the first place. You may fail 1,000 times, or maybe not. That depends on your state of attachment. And it has to do with perception and sensation. And how to overcome it. But first we have really to define and say, what is that? What is perception? In order to detach from perception, we would have to identify it. What is it? And the definition may astonish you. Intuition or immediate perception is an activity of the 5 external senses, a perception of the 5 external senses. A sensual perception. You perceive something. Can also be an intuitively direct perception by means of the 6th sense, which is a sense of intuitive thought. This latter perception is limited to the intuitive perception of space, of knowledge itself as such. And finally you perceive a state that is wholly devoid of object. Dear friends, you can perceive objects. You can perceive the sun, the moon, your mother, your father, your room. But you can also perceive something, or you can be in a state of perception devoid of objects. And that is a state that you experience empirically in soul breath meditation. Let us take a closer look to the term perception. Perception. It derives from the Latin perceptio. Has to do with interpretation, identification, organization. Well, interpretation if it is a sensory information. In order to represent and understand the presented information. Perception has to do with signals. They go through the nervous system. They stimulate sensory system. I see the eye as contact with a object, goes through the ether, teaches the Book of Light, hits on the retina, and causes a stimulation of the retina. Now, it's, so to speak, a passive receipt of such signals, but then we conclude from them. That is clear. This, yes. We define them, yes. There is a combination of logical syllogism, faculty of reason, so to speak. Intuitive perception should not be set in opposition to a syllogism. But it should be rather be made like what I mentioned in the beginning. I perceive something and then I judge what it is. And that judgment may be right, may be wrong. Our senses are miserable. Every dog smells better, runs faster. Every eagle sees 10,000 times better. It's just our thinking that helped us to survive. So, intuition or immediate perception is immediate perception. Is perception of the 5 external senses. So it is a sensuous perception. And if I talk about intuition, direct perception of the 6th sense, the sense of intuitive thought. I am aware of something and intuitively I say, yeah, this is that or that. Now there is a something limited compared to the intuitive perception of space. Because we don't perceive much of space. Yeah, we see the stars, the sun, this and that, but we don't go deeper. We don't perceive the nature of these things. We identify them as objects. And the Book of Light teaches these are alive structures of intelligent beings. Each of them outliving their karma, the cosmic karma, perception and sensation. Even the God of the sun, the solar God, has a perception and sensation. Dear friends, why do I go so deeply into that matter? People all too often and all too willingly try to detach from something about whose nature they are not correctly informed. And so they may even be in danger while detaching from something. And that something may revolt and rebel against the attempt of detachment. And therefore, let's better look at perception and sensation, because the path teaches detachment from perception and sensation if you want to become timeless, eternal, immortal, without duration. You would have to detach from everything that is mortal. And the definition of what is mortal and not is given by the church, as by religion, your soul, but the Book of Light teaches, or your spirit. This is only a very refined substance, super refined. You can see it with your senses. And you experience with it life in heaven, and yes, you live there. Yes, it's beautiful there, but it's also transient. If there is any among you of the billions of people in the world who dare to ask, is there something that cannot be taken away from me? Then you are at the right place. And what the church calls spirit is transient and therefore anatta, therefore temporary, therefore arises and passes away, and is not the right goal for someone who wants the highest, which is nirvana. Abolition of perception and sensation. These words lead you directly to nirvana, if you want to. If not, cannot hurt to listen a bit to it. You experience a certain ability of detachment just by listening to what I say. Schopenhauer was a great philosopher. He said perception is not only the source of all knowledge, it is itself knowledge. And he says that although it arises and passes away, we gain certain knowledge from it. Dear friends, satisfaction, complete satisfaction is only given by direct sense-perceived knowledge. I can tell you 1,000 hours something. Maybe I'm wrong. How do you know? Maybe I'm wrong all the time. The only one who can decide that is you. And if you decide that the Book of Light is wrong, don't bother further with it. I don't force anybody. Don't bother with it. So we know the Book of Light teaches only direct sense-perceived knowledge gives complete satisfaction. If you know, you don't need any further to believe. We are in the age of Aquarius, the age of knowledge. We went through the... excuse me. I had a pneumonia and I was already on deathbed. But karma, religion would say, the good Lord kept you alive. No. Okay. If you know something, you don't need to believe in it. Right? If I know 1 and 1 is 2, I don't have to say, I believe 1 and 1 is 2. I say, I know 1 and 1 is 2. See, that's the difference between religion and the Book of Light. And this is why the Book of Light unites all religions in the world, because the Book of Light is the only scripture that says all religions, all sciences, all philosophies are completely right in their core. But throughout the millions and billions of years, they have been interpreted. And the core got covered by a husk, by a vahan, as we say in Sanskrit, by a vehicle, which then was identified as the core. But as clear as the core of an apple is not the structure around the core, as clear is religion, when you take it literally, not the truth. But the Book of Light reveals the core of all religions, sciences, philosophies, and unites them. So only the highest degree of truth permanently can satisfy you if you are really a seeker. And if you really want the truth, the time comes when you ask yourself, can we overcome suffering, meaning also death? Because I tell you, dear friends, science, culture, philosophy, religion are nothing but interpretations of fear of death. And no, you cannot take any medicine and live eternally and so forth and so on. What arises must pass away. But because you, and now we come to the word perception, you perceive the arising and passing away. You cannot be what arises and passes away. There you have the path to immortality. All you have to do is to define what you are not, what arises and passes away. Detach yourself from your desire for it, and you become timeless, eternal, immortal. Glory to the Book of Light, dear friends. Glory. The Book of Light succeeded in crystallizing the great primary problem of mankind is all its purity. Free from all accessories. Excuse my horrible English. I try my best. Purified. Book of Light purifies you from obscure, refused byproducts longing for metaphysical knowledge. It solves the problem in such a manner that you, by your own direct perception, this is what we talk about, perception, by your own direct perception, by your own immediate insight, you convince yourself of the correctness of the solution at any time. You don't do that as religions often do, by merely drawing a bill of exchange payable after death in an uncertain future. No. It may happen, or it happens, that the Book of Light, of whom many say it's the greatest scripture on earth, because it exists since reawakening of this universe about 150 billion years ago, precisely at this moment, makes its way among mankind. Because mankind looks for a teaching, longs for a teaching that, on one hand, presents the kernel, the core of all religions, of all metaphysics, pure and unmixed, and on the other hand, guarantees a solution in accordance with the methods of exact science by self-experimentation. Self-experimentation. Empirically, you will see the truth of my words. And if now you say this is not true, don't bother with it. Go your own way, go in peace. This is the doctrine of the Book of Light that awakens you, culminating point of 311 trillion years, 311 trillion 40 billion years, one Mahamanvantara. Is it a wonder, dear friends, that by presentation of that knowledge, you don't want to believe any longer, but you want to know. You want to be sure. And more will swarm around the Book of Light. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, atheists, anarchists, I almost said. Yeah, they too. Did you know that the first people who were called atheists were the Christians? Because it's a Greek term. The Christians did not believe in the gods of the Greeks, the theoi. So they were called atheoi. Later turned into atheists. Glory to the Book of Light. This is the importance of the understanding of perception in order to overcome it. The Book of Light teaches only on perception and how to overcome it. Or if you don't want to overcome it, then you would have to learn how to perceive a sensation by not being too much attached to it, so that you have a reincarnation with as little as possible suffering, because right now we are on the ascending arc back to the spirit. All forms are dissoluted by natural radioactivity. Everything becomes more refined, transparent, spiritual. So don't be too much attached, because your attachment and thirst and trishna for life will survive in permanent atoms until next birth, and then you're confronted with it. And that may be a great problem, dear friends. Experience at least once a day in meditation the overcoming of perception and sensation. From that point of view, you will solve all your problems much easier, with more distance, with more equanimity of mind, and so forth and so on. Yeah? In this crazy world, dear friends, we live in a nut house ruled by insane people. The Book of Light teaches nirvana is the abolition of perception and sensation. The abolition of perception and sensation. Perception and sensation are so powerful that you need a clear definition of what that is. Otherwise you detach from something that at that state of being you should not detach from. When it's so important for me, because the knowledge of the English language is very weak, to use the right terms, and it is a great responsibility, because I teach you immortality. Do you think I would waste my time here just by satisfying my ego to talk to you? I'm a superstar from Germany. When I sing, 400,000 people come. I get so much money, I don't need to make any money, and my ego is satisfied when I am on stage. And yet I see, dear friends, when I talk about letting go of all that, there's more satisfaction. So let's see. When the senses are activated, we have a correspondent consciousness with this visual consciousness, auditory consciousness, and so forth. It flames up. It suffices to be touched by the external object. For instance, visual consciousness arises in dependence of the eye and the forms. And the conjunction of these three constitutes contact. The same with the auditory consciousness, in dependence upon the ear and the sounds. And there's a conjunction of the three, and that constitutes contact. What other sense organ do we have? The nose. Independence on nose and smells. Olfactory consciousness. Conjunction of the three constitutes contact. What else is there? Tongues and flavors. Gustatory consciousness. Constitutes contact. Conjunction of the three. Now we have the body and objects of contaction, and we have a tactile consciousness. They can see. Conjunction of the three constitutes contact. And finally, this is all upon the organ of thought now. We have mental consciousness. Dear friends, this brings me to the shocking conclusion For you, maybe, not for me. That, you see, there are many seminars for thousands and thousands of dollars and euros who promise you to have self-consciousness. I tell you it's a fraud. There's no self-consciousness. Whatever you are conscious about is what you are not. You cannot find yourself by consciousness. Because the process of consciousness is directed away from the one who is conscious to that of which he is conscious. And if he is aware that this of what he is conscious as arising and passing away, he cannot possibly be it. So therefore you can never have self-consciousness. You can detach yourself from what you are not. We call it anatta. Yes, that you can. This is what we are talking about here. But you never, 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 never will have consciousness of yourself. Forget it. Any guru that tells you that you can have self-consciousness is a fraud. We'll talk about that in another lecture. Now, one has to be aware that before consciousness is kindled, or a contact, before consciousness is kindled, this external object stimulates sense activities. And so even my own body certainly does not exist for me, so to speak. It's just a reaction of that body to which I am clinging. Well, therefore, I am not the body. I have a body, yes, agreed. Because only in consequence of a kindling of consciousness, I am touched by the external object. To the extent that I am affected by a sensation, no doubt. And we spoke about the sensations. Pleasant, unpleasant, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Is there more? I don't think so. Is there more than a pleasant sensation, an unpleasant sensation, or a neither pleasant nor unpleasant? I don't think so. If you know of, please. But by sensation alone, you cannot experience more than this, because at a certain stage you don't even know even the object that evokes the sensation. And now we come to perception. Such object arises first through perception, which is directly attached to the sensation. So when I look at the lowest sense of touch, it's a touch. Sense of touch is the lowest sense. You can clearly observe the temporal relation between sensation and perception. Example. When you are in the dark and you knock against an object with your arm, in consequence of that interplay between the organ of touch and the object, there is consciousness. And in which the contact, first of all, occurs between you and the object. But if it's a very deep sleep, so there's no interplay between the organ of touch and the external object, because the organ of touch is sleeping. And there's no consciousness to be evoked. Then you're also not touched by it. Very easy. But if you are touched, in you arises a sensation. Now comes the perception of the object. It was brought about the sensation only gradually through constant touching. The perception of the object that brought about the sensation occurs only gradually through constant touching. But let's look at results of this perceptual activity by means of your organ of perception. is still very poor. It may be that each of your outer senses convey to you only definite properties of things, or different. For instance, can you see the air? No. Well, in London maybe. So you see, the eye sees only colors. The eye sees colors. And that perception of the eye is even not correctly defined by science. When you see an object, what happens? Light strikes on the object, travels through ether to your eye, hits you, literally hits your eye. You have an impact. And this impact you identify as the object. A cat sees 10 times the object better than you. It sees the astral object. It sees the energy surrounding the object. A dog sees a person, his good aura or his negative aura. And if a person has a negative aura, he can smile at the dog as much as he wants. The dog will bite him or will bark at him. Glory to the Book of Light. Difference. Glory. That it reveals to us such wonderful new sight of everything that may not have been known or seen before. The result of perceptual activity is at first, by means of our organs of perception, very poor. Each of our outer senses conveys to us a different property of things. So perception per se is a very low kind of knowledge. There has to be a development. And again, we must be aware of the fact that the ear is only conscious of sounds, the nose of odors, the organs of taste, sense of touch, degree of hardness and firmness of objects, and thus gives us also a lead to a knowledge of an object's size. Shape, hardness, temperature. Now we have to put all these together to really have a judgment about what we perceive. There is this beautiful example that I read many times in philosophers, and I will repeat that here, because it denotes exactly why we actually perceive very little without led by the Book of Light, I should say. And see, you see at a distance, an open country, some spot of color. It rises above the ground. And well, what would you say if somebody would ask you, then what is it? Say, well, it's a spot of color or whatever. But then you are not sure what it is. You can say it's a spot of color, but that doesn't define anything. In order to know what it really represents, the intellect must come into play. Yeah? The outline, for example, of that spot of color looks like a human figure. So you could conclude from that state of perception or awareness that obviously it is a figure. Is it really? See how we need steps to be aware. An animal or an eagle or something like that, they may know that immediately. So the only thing that we have that puts us, so to speak, above the animals, if you could use that word, was given to us by the Manasaputras. This Manas Rupa is mind, so often abused by mankind. Now we have the result, a return reincarnation of the Atlantean Wars may end in an atomic confrontation. So now we think at the spot, the human figure. Okay, because that colored spot has the outlines of a human figure. But maybe it's just a flat picture, that had been moved or whatever. It has different shadows of color, different brightness, different darkness. And, but we should say it's a three-dimensional figure. We should assume that. Then we conclude further that this should be a living person. Yeah. It moves, it has a human outline, and so forth. It's a figure, it's a human living person. But the form does not move anymore, or it is still. Now I am uncertain. Is it a person who is still? Did I have wrong conclusion, wrong perception? Maybe it's just a scarecrow, for example. Just dressed up to look like a man. That's possible. Because as I come nearer and nearer and nearer, I forgot to mention that. Of course, I come nearer and nearer, and then I have more perception and my definitions becomes more precise. But you see, my second sense, I'm too far away. But then my second sense is affected. First it was just a sense of seeing. Now it includes the sense of hearing. And also, excuse me, dear friends, and also my sense of seeing increases also because I come closer. Yet I haven't yet defined what it is. Three-dimensional figure. Okay. Form doesn't move. Now that my sense of hearing. What do I hear? A human voice. And now it's clear it's a human. It's a human, no? My intellect tells me it's a human. It's a human voice. It's a human. And if it's a human, it must be a human being. That's clear. See how my intellect works without me? See how you are not your thoughts? Did you ever hear such a radical, drastic, dramatic teaching? You are not your thoughts. Cogito ergo sum. I think I am, Descartes. Not right. In meditation, you can even stop thinking and still you are. If you would be your thoughts, you would lose consciousness. You would lose consciousness in meditation or when you don't think anymore. So, now you have deceived yourself. Why? You see next to the figure, another figure rising from the ground and runs away with a shout. Well, now you know the voice didn't come from the original figure, or didn't it? Or did it? Your supposed certainty about the true nature of that form again disappears. You cannot come to any definite perception. Perception. You achieve with the Book of Light the highest perception, but then in order to detach from it, if you want to avoid reincarnation, glory to the Book of Light. Now the figure begins to run. Now I'm certain it's a human being. Or maybe a masked animal, I don't know. Well, let's say a human being. But there must be another illusion possible. What if the form was a self-moving, ingeniously contrived automaton, a robot? Or could be. Nowadays they have many robots. you want to obtain actual certainty. So you have to come nearer to the form, right? So you can recognize the face and speak to it and so forth, have communication with it. Only then can you make sure that figure has all the characteristics emerging from the general representation, human being, that existed in you. Then you can draw the infallible conclusion that you have before you a human being. Only then you actually, and now we have again our magical word, perceive it intuitively as a human being. That's now for your reality. Of course, somebody who is occult or who is metaphysically inclined could say, well, could be a Kriya Shakti production of some outer of space being or whatever. But we don't want to go too far in that matter. And therefore, dear friends, we analyze the entire process of perception. The entire process of perception anticipated the intellectual nature of empirical, intuitive perception. Empirical meaning you personally experience that. You must be convinced that the Book of Light is truth. If it's no truth for you, it's no truth for you. Then you have to look for truth for something somewhere else. You must decide if this path is the right path for you. I only follow orders of the Mahachohan. I pass it on to you. As imperfect as you can hear, but And I'm also not as good health, so I apologize, please. Through what? Let's follow that Jacob ladder. Through what is sensation conditioned? Who knows it? Through contact. So what you feel, you perceive. We are perception here. Topic is perception. You perceive as forms of light, sounds, and so on. And that which you perceive, you think together. As we experienced now here, different characteristics of the object in several steps. And then when you have thought it together, you extend it, out into space. Because to think means to move mental matter. Glory to the Book of Light. So we call it perception of the extended world. Papancha. Sanskrit, papancha. Which enters in the form consciousness through the eye, consciousness through the ear, consciousness through the nose, odors, consciousness through the sun, juices, object of touch, consciousness through the body, the things of the past, present, and future. Entering consciousness through the organ of thought. This is the intellectual nature of intuitive perception. And in order that you, in meditation, can detach from it, you better first learn about what it is, so that you know from what you detach and if you really want to detach from it. We have an occurrence of the immediate perception of an object, but with that there are sources of error. Not in the outer senses, and so far these are normal, but I mean in the synthetic activity of our intellect, As I mentioned in these different steps, when you come closer and closer to that colored spot, and you have constantly to make new decisions. What is it? What is it? What is it? You want to know who you are? You will never know by that way. You will only know by going back. That means by meditating and going inside. You cannot find the source outside. Zillions of dollars and euros are wasted by the scientists to look for the origin of the universe somewhere out there. You are fools. Save that money, give it to the hungry children. Source of everything, including the so-called Big Bang reawakening of the universe, is in you. Therefore I declare, dear friends, you have to take everything with a little bit of humor. Otherwise you can shoot yourself or you get crazy in this crazy world. Therefore I declare the origin of everything inside of you, and therefore I declare this Earth, the planet Earth, I declare it as a meditation planet. From now on, guided by the Book of Light, everybody will study not how to establish here, but how to get out of here. This is a science in itself, dear friends. What have we reached with the science by establishing ourselves here? One nation attacks the other, steals their resources, and soon one day the entire planet will burn. Is that the purpose of life? I don't think so. What is the intellectual nature of intuitive perception? That nature will be explained in the following more detailed. When there is an occurrence of immediate perception of an object, the sources of error appear, but it's made by our intellect, as I said, and it's called deceptive appearance. And this occurs, for example, let me give you another example. You sit in two railway trains, standing next to each other. Now suddenly, you see the train you sit in set in motion. Whereas in reality, your train is standing still. The other one is moving off. How comes? Are your senses that weak, or is your perception that unclear? Well, the reason is the intellect, not the eye, as many think. It's not a visual error, it's an intellectual error that deceives you. The eye acquaints you only with the fact that a change in the position of the two trains is beginning to take place. That's what the eye tells you. It does not tell you from which of one of the two trains the change occurs. That is an action of your intellect, because you are accepting the departure of your train. You conclude quite unconsciously that your train may depart at any moment. And so you see a change occur in the position of your train relative to the other. And so it's your train that has produced this change of position. Your train. The intellect tells you. There is a notion occurring to you, not according to reality. Because you are under the impression that your train moved. And many people explain that with an optical error. It's not. It's an intellectual error. Deceptive appearance is brought by you only such as a false conclusion, and it's clear when it is a carriage. Now, you could not be even swayed by the intellect if you would know that you sit in a single carriage without an engine. But then the intellect, on the other hand, would not bring to you such perception. Why? Because you would not sit there expecting to drive, to move. There's a reason. Let's say you wouldn't know that the machine has no engine. and you are somewhat unconcentrated, and you climb into that train, into that wagon. So now you sit there, and next to you a train moves. Then again, the intellect may say, hey, I'm moving, or we are moving. And that's the difference. And by these little examples, we have to try to understand, dear friends, how perception works. And in the same way, we have deceptive appearance in the consequence when we see the sun continue to move in the heavens. In reality, we only see our own position on the earth constantly shifting in relation to that of the sun. Of course, there are some really crazy people. Well, it's a big money thing. You can sell books with that and everything. Think the earth is flat, yeah. There comes the Book of Light. It'll teach you everything. The earth is not flat. It was flat. Now you may say, how that? Every planet who appears first in the cosmic dust is a flat disk of cold fire. Who can fathom it, dear friends? May fathom it, and then later it condenses in a globular structure. So prior to every physical evolution, there was, of course, a refined, transparent, spiritual evolution. And that does not deny creation, because there's also creation. But what we talk about creation is not what the church means. Well, you see, I get lost in details. That's what the Johann said to me. You're full! Sit down and write and don't get lost in details. I didn't ask for this. Oh, excuse me, I don't have to lean myself too much out of the window. Oh, yeah. So, a deceptive appearance results, even in normal cases, from when the intellect as a central organ has a share in bringing about intuitive empirical perception. When, dear friends, when does an intellect not bring enough intuitive perception, intellectual perception? Well, if such intellect is not sufficiently developed. I left school before the Abitur, I got to go to university because I had the feeling they're teaching nonsense. They're teaching nonsense. And I escaped into music, becoming a superstar. Because I couldn't bear the thought that they don't know the truth. So I escaped into emotion. Why not? But then I was led to the great Johann, glory to the Book of Light. He said, sit down and write. And I did, and now I'm trying to summarize. I do not read directly from the Book of Light. This you can do yourself. In the link that you see here in the video. No? Germany we call it PDF. Well, it's the entire book. Thousands of pages, handwritten, mostly handwritten. Some are typed, but very few. Good. Under the guidance of the Book of Light, in complete agreement with daily experience, and with the observations and conclusions of what I should call exact Book of Light science, the origination and mechanism of personality is presented thus, and its ability to perceive. And that leads, of course, because our topic is perception and sensation. Every sensation peculiar to what is formed ranks as a component of the group of sensation. Every perception peculiar to what is formed ranks as a component of the group of perception. Same with mentation, cognition, and so forth. We will talk about personality in due time. Dear friends, if I go further, it becomes clear that the four groups of sensation, perception, activities of the mind, and cognition, and cognition are always found together. Which leads us to the topic of consciousness, collision of an organ of sense with an object corresponding to it, and what flames up? Consciousness. Then at once sensation and perception of the object, as well as functions of the mind and the cognition, they appear as inevitable consequences in consciousness. Dear friends, this is a chain of a chain reaction. Yeah? An organ of sense collides with an object. Your eye, say that collides because Book of Light teaches we are all connected, we are all one through finest ethereal matter. There's also other definition of the astral realms, but I don't go into that right now. This is how everything is interwoven and collected. Consciousness, sensation, perception, activities of the mind and cognition are a product, respective product, of the activity of the senses. They always occur joined together. They always generated new by these. And that is with the exactment of, it's like a watch with a piece of mechanism, perfect. Driven by Trishna, desire, along the matrix. Dear friends, even if you didn't understand one word I say, something in you understood. Believe you me. And something in you is strengthened to let go, if you decide so. If you decide so. I don't force you. If there's somebody who wants to detach,